Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. Lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you.
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. And I see there's quite a bit of discussion about the Eskom situation. Well, just for the record, the reason the videos didn't work for a large part of yesterday was because of Eskom. The video server was in the dark, so I do apologize about that, and we're going to work on getting another backup server outside South Africa so that we don't have issues like this in the future. But it is what it is. Right, now, just on that, again, that Eskom issue, I've just put a comment in there that I've got an upcoming live stream with Wynand du Toit from Saitlanders, Colonel Wynand. And we actually talk about the Eskom issue, and I think you're going to find his comments there very interesting, because I agree with him that if Eskom fails, that'll be the end of the ANC government. And I think that what you'll find is an interim government will be put in place where you'll have people who know what they're doing, if I can put it that way, and then things will change for the better for South Africa, hopefully. Alright, I'm going to get our live stream on. Now look, I've got to once again warn you, this is pre-recorded because load shedding, yeah. I'm speaking to Eugene Engelbrecht, who is a criminologist, a very specialized type of job and very relevant to South Africa when you consider the chaos the country is in. Here we go. Let's go across to Eugene Engelbrecht. Hi Eugene, great to meet you.
Morning Scott, thank you for having me on your show. Really looking forward to our little chat today.
Yeah, look, you're very welcome. And look, I just want to start off by saying that there have been a couple of events in recent days in South Africa that have really, to me, spelt out that the country is cactus and it's got a huge problem. And I think the one that is the elephant in the room is what happened in Boksburg just before Christmas, where that LPG truck got stuck under the bridge. And the driver went to the police to get help, said, look, I've had an accident. And the police didn't attend the scene until after the devastating explosion that I believe has now killed over 40 people. What does that tell you about the level of protection or support given by the South African Police Service in South Africa today?
Well, Scott, it's an interesting point you raise there, because ultimately, any disaster like that, there needs to be within any structure, community, and specifically in a municipal structure, disaster management plans, which will include your police, it's going to include your fire brigade or your fire services, it's going to include your disaster management, at a council level. And there should be ways that triggers that kind of response to make sure that these kind of disasters don't happen. Because LP gas in South Africa is not an uncommon product that's being transported around and or used for heating or other things, So this was inevitable at some point. In the balance of probability, there would be some kind of an accident or a massive gas leak. The fact that the driver went to the police and told them, listen, we have a problem here, I've damaged my truck, I've got a massive gas leak, and it didn't even ring any bells, and no specific sequence of events was triggered from there, just shows that once again we have something on paper that never ever works in reality, because it's never practiced. There's no buy-in, no one takes it serious. It's very much a case of rah thing. I'm here for a job, I'm not really here for my passion, I'm not really here to make a difference. I just want my money at the end of the month, and by the way, I'm going to do less and less because we haven't had a proper increase for 3 years. And that's the mentality we're dealing with on the ground right now. So ultimately, at the end of the day, that disaster could have and should have been averted through anybody with any kind of training or knowledge or background to say that, hang on, huge LP gas leak equals potential huge fireball equals let's get something happening here. And the fact that there was no real interest in that, don't worry, we'll let the tires down, we'll drive it out, or whatever was going through their minds. No one saw the red flag.
Yeah.
That is the problem. In that kind of job, call it a job, call it a vacation, call it whatever, as a police person, there should have been some kind of a red flag or a warning bell gone off somewhere. Hang on, we've got a highly explosive situation literally on the ground here. Who do we contact? What do we do? Who are the experts? It's fire. It's your natural disaster teams at the municipal level. Get the guys in, evacuate. But they did absolutely nothing. Fire brigade arrived on the scene and were keeping the tanker cold, apparently, because that's what they do when there's a gas leak. Now, various gases, I'm not an expert on it, but I do know this much. LPG, when it escapes fast, actually freezes the tank. It cools down. So there's no fire risk in the tank. The escaped LPG, however, is heavier than air, so it actually drops to the ground. So within a ditch under a bridge like that, you are actually creating a firebomb of note, which is exactly what happened. Not sure what triggered it. Somebody lit a smoke or tried to start a car, who knows. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there was no cognizance of the threat of something as basic as a serious gas leak. That's the fact, and that is really scary, because it means we have such a lack of competence in the people that we look to keep us safe. And are supposed to be trained, supposed to have this knowledge and have these escalation procedures and who to call and what numbers to phone in the event of disasters. It just didn't happen.
Well, the ANC are clearly clueless, and you just have to look at the hospital system today. It's a complete and utter disgrace. I have so many live streams with people who are nurses or people in the profession who are complaining about how other nursing staff and even doctors don't care. All they're worried about is picking up their checks on a Friday. That's all they're worried about. And it goes across the whole board. So if we look at this, I think back, I lived in South Africa in the 1980s. And I remember the South African police service was incredibly efficient. Yes, maybe it was an apartheid time police force, but crime was very, very small. The police were totally on the ball. There was no corruption going on. If you look at the hospital system, if you were sick, you could go into a hospital and they would have everything you needed, regardless of color. Now, you think of hospitals like Baragwanath and that big one in Soweto, which is now completely screwed under the ANC, the black population, it wasn't just the hospital system for the whites. The African population had hospitals that they could go to and have heart transplants and all sorts of things, which they can't do today because it's been totally screwed up, and there's been such a massive brain from South Africa as a result of what's going on, and that I think is a hugely concerning issue. But just getting back to the crimes, I'm thinking of two recent things that I've seen from South Africa. One is that De Ruyter was apparently poisoned the day after he resigned and just before Nasrec had their meeting and re-elected that criminal Ramaphosa as president of South Africa again. And the other one was a cash and transit vehicle, which was basically knocked off its wheels on the side of the road somewhere in Soweto, and it was like a swarm of flies around it. People stealing cash where they could. Everything seems to be totally out of control in South Africa.
It's very hard to remain positive and not to actually believe that. I mean, when we're talking about the evolution of crime within South Africa, I think people like to use the apartheid 93-94 barrier line as a means to justify where we are today. I think it's getting a bit hollow. I think you'd agree with me that ultimately at the end of the day, this life is an evolution, and you can't keep blaming previous structures for where you are now. 30 years has been a long time to get something to work. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if we look at ESCOM as a model to show just how messed up this country is, it's probably the perfect model. I think De Ruyter is probably the biggest risk right now, because if anything, he's uncovered the depth and the breadth of the corruption and the efficiency within ESCOM, who the mafias are, be it the diesel mafias, the coal mafias, the transport mafias. Just remember, the Guptas cut their teeth on the coal and ESCOM. Their whole thing about state capture went around ESCOM, where the previous president fueling that from behind. So between SAA and ESCOM, they became the cash cows of the corrupt. And ESCOM, because it's an ongoing service to the country, I mean, we keep trying to keep the lights on. Every cent was thrown at it at some point to try and keep the turbines turning. We hear stories of people dropping off stones instead of coal. There will be, large amounts of diesel in an order that just never arrives, and all these sort of things that are escaping now, only at this stage, after what we can see is virtually the collapse of ESCOM. They've run it to destruction.
Yeah.
They've gobbled up all maintenance monies, they've destroyed it, and I think a man like De Ruyter has come in, and he's probably uncovered a lot of this stuff. So I would imagine it's not what he can do, it's what he knows that makes him a very serious threat. Yeah. I'm surprised it's only been after the amount of people around where I live that are shot daily in their motor cars. He's probably lucky that they picked up the poison in his coffee, but still I think he's in a very precarious position. And he needs to definitely have some level of concern about his longevity with what he knows. But it's just absolutely disgusting, that's what our country comes to. If you see the way that the opposition, either criminal leaders, politicians, councillors just get shot here, gang-style shootings, drive-by shootings to make way for the next person to come through, it's a culture. It's no longer a shock, it's no longer, oh my goodness, did you hear? It's like, okay, another one, who was it? It's literally become blasé. So, people talk about the narco traffickers in South America. I think they should actually come and have a look here, because we deal with it on a daily basis. And it's really, if people cannot see just through what we, it's the frog in the hot water theory, because we see it often, we start thinking it's normal. It's definitely not normal. So yeah, the cash in transits is like a lucky packet thing for people today. And if you happen to get there and to see one, and it's par for the course to jump out and snatch up as much cash as you can, probably even with the police making sure that you're safe doing it. and taking a packet or two themselves, unfortunately, openly, and not even trying to do it behind closed doors anymore. We really have become a nation of opportunists, regardless.
Yeah. Now look, just on that particular aspect, there's a crime wave, which is where crime goes out of control, and there's a criminal insurgency, which is where, as far as I understand it, it's where the crime is no longer just random crime, it's organized crime, and it can often go right to the top, including, as I believe in South Africa, right up to the present. What is the difference between a criminal insurgency versus a crime wave?
It's an interesting topic, and it's something that we've been looking at for some time, because crime wave is something you would expect. Let's say maybe after a natural disaster, people lose their homes, they're looking for basic sustenance, like we said earlier, your bottom layer of Maslow's hierarchy. I need a bed, I need food, I need something to just survive on. And they might you find a sudden upsurge of petty stealing or shoplifting, whatever it might be, scrap metal stealing for cash. A criminal insurgency is a very different thing. In terms of the whole concept of organized crime, and you compare the organized gangs to, shall we call it, political insurgents, what makes them the same? The similarities, they both want to operate in a failed area. They know that they can live off the passive support of the community, because the community is not going to call the police. Because normally what they would do is they would even look out for the community to a certain level, or threaten them to the point where they just won't do it. So they create a safe environment. They come in, they take control of space, they take control of the area. They would normally push the police out, and or they would exist on the peripherals of a policing or an enforcement structure that has also failed. Now we know in South Africa, we talk about resources at a policing level and so forth. You'll find 10 policemen riding around in a 6-seater urban cruiser because they don't have vehicles, but all the vehicles are standing broken at the police station, probably broken by the shifts because they all want to ride the new vehicle. That's the level of mentality we're dealing with. The corruption in the garages, the government garages, the way they strip one vehicle to keep another vehicle going. It's a common thing that people know SAPs don't have vehicles. So the chances of even the community reporting and SAPs actually arriving is very little. And knowing as organized crime that even if they do, you have absolutely no conscience issues of just eliminating them, just opening up fire and killing the cops, which is happening all the time at the moment. There's no respect for law enforcement in the country. If you enter gangland in South Africa now, in any one of these townships, specifically those around the area I'm living in KZN, the chances of actually just driving out is very little if you're any kind of branded vehicle. They're not scared to engage with SAPs. They're not scared to just absolutely pepper them with automatic weapons, high caliber AK-47s, fully automatic, which means they're actually weapons of war, but they're dime a dozen. So that's the difference between a crime wave, people needing sustenance and covering, and organized crime that actually takes over areas, creates bases from which to basically spring their operational plans, to whether it be cash in transits, whether it be ATM bombings, proliferation of vehicle hijacking and theft syndicates currently, all for cross-border exports. It's major stuff, and invariably it's not a one-way crime. These gangs would run vehicles out, narcotics back, there's human trafficking thrown into the pile. So it's really a very well organized and strategized base area for these gangs to actually operate from. So based on that definition, we're way beyond your normal crime wave, where we're actually seeing the sophistication of the attacks, where stopper groups are being dropped off. This is to come and raid they want to hit an armed robbery of a cell phone shop in a mall. We're talking literally a cell phone shop. They'll come in 7 or 8 people, drop off their lookouts at the entrance, armed with high caliber automatic weapons. Any private security or SAPs or metro driving in immediately get engaged with fire, shoot to kill, and they will then extract and leave in a very professional way. You'll find these guys running with serious equipment, military grade cell phone jammers, radios, equipment that you're not just going to buy on buy. Where are these guys getting this equipment? Who's actually involved? There was a few years back a colleague of mine up in what was known as the West Transvaal showed me a picture of a 40 millimeter grenade launcher, military spec, South African military spec, that was picked up on a cash in transit scene there. That was actually traced back to one of the military bases that had been rented out for 10,000 rand for the day. Included 3 training grounds and 2 live grenades. So, you know,
Wow.
with the ease of access to a bit of money on the table, is you can get anything out there today to do what you need to do.
Yeah, and look, if you look at Bekesele, I mean, he seriously reminds me of the equivalent of Marlon Brando in that film where he's like the mafia. And, you know, he with that hat he wears and his attitude, he is so impetuous and so... I work with Pietrosito, who's an activist against farm attacks and farm murders in South Africa. And he was invited to a special meeting with Bekesele because he was making so much noise about farm attacks. And Bekesele said, we will set up a special little committee to go and look into this. That was in March 2022. They haven't had one meeting yet. And you know, it was all bullshit. But of course, at the time, it was a big press release about how they're going to do this. Now, nothing's happened. It's all bullshit. When it comes to crime, clearly, there's an agenda by the ANC hierarchy to keep pushing the crime because they're on the take. And they want to try and create as much chaos as they can. So, that brings me to the point. What defines a failed state, and what is the current status of South Africa? Because I see South Africa today as a failed state.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you have a look at external grading or rating agencies like this Peace Fund, where they grade states according to what's going on and you know, specifically on these levels, South Africa is sitting at 72 out of 179 countries on the Peace Fund rating, and we went up 2 basis points from 2021 to 2022, where we are now entering a dangerous level, as they would call it, or elevated level of failed state. It's what they're calling an elevated warning. Okay, nice way of putting it. Okay, basically, if you want to, you know, break down into layman's terms the definition of a failed state, we're talking about a country or a political structure that is disintegrated, and that's a good word, it's disintegrated point, with the basic conditions and the responsibilities of what you would expect of a sovereign government are no longer being met, and it doesn't function properly. I mean, it sounds like a very harsh statement, but it's, like you said earlier, come and visit South Africa now, someone like you that comes from here, comes back here, look at the roads, look at the condition of the lighting, look at the condition, the environmental crime features such as the cutting of lawns, the trimming of bush, standard municipal functions, if you want to call it that, for urban areas. And then move up into your national, you know, what do you call it, what do they like to call them, it's what I can't remember, like Eskom, SAA, and so forth. I mean, our national carrier has been liquidated. Eskom is only there because it's the only thing that can make enough generation to short periods of time.
Dudamiani did a fantastic job, didn't she, do with South African Airways?
Really wonderful. So, you know, really, we can go through probably the whole morning just talking about real exemplary areas where the state has failed to even run something they received in a fully running condition. All they had to do was maintain and build. They didn't have to start anything from zero. Unfortunately, whether they like to hear that or not, that's the truth. And to have run it down into the ground, I mean, where I remember in the whole Zondo Commission thing, that's a different thing we'll talk about. When the state found out how the state stole all the money, I mean, I think it's hilarious. And pay R1 billion to find out how the state lost control of the state. I mean, it's just a discussion for another day. It's It sounds almost like a comedy show, but it's real. But coming back to the SOEs, I think they call them
State-owned enterprises.
State Republic. You know, and the way that they've failed to even keep basic things going. You touched on the medical earlier. You know, it's not just the brain drain. Again, it's the level of training and the level of pride that hasn't been transferred into the current medical staff. You know, basic hygiene doesn't take a lot of money. It's a mindset. Keeping things clean, keeping things flowing. And when you walk into a hospital and you're not sure if you've come to a stable or a hospital, filthy, smells. You know, it's basic things that have just become the norm now in South Africa, to be in that state of disrepair, or no longer functioning properly, as the last words are. You know, coming back to things like your local councils. So many local councils are in absolute financial disarray and are bankrupt because, again, we've inflated, you know, employment figures over the years. The ruling party want to claim that we've created 26,000 jobs or whatever in the year. All they did was employ them in councils to sit and do nothing at big salaries, you know, at the cost of the ratepayer, where they brought all these people, but it'll take 16 guys to dig open a pipe. You know, with 15 watch and one guy kind of scratches around in the dirt for 2 days, and preferably a Sunday because it's overtime. You can see the absolute lack of commitment to management, cost cutting, efficiency is gone. It's like it's our right to abuse the system for as much money as we want, not understanding at some point the golden goose will die. It's going to happen. And it's close. It's in its death throes as we speak. You know, coming back to organs of state that are supposed to be there for control and for leadership, such as your police and so forth, I have no idea why Ramaphosa hangs on to a guy like Becky Cele. He's actually an embarrassment. The man is not a policeman. He's not capable of policing. The current commissioner, Sotole, is under investigation from IPID for refusing to cooperate in the investigation the murder of Colonel Shaul Kania, who was murdered because he was investigating gangs, and 8 senior policemen for the flow of guns back into the ganglands.
And he was tracked down through his mobile phone, wasn't he?
Yeah. There was a time the enterprise I'm involved with, we also had access to private picking of phones. The rules were quite strict, but again, you know, it's use and abuse. So he was pinged like. They pinged the colonel's phone something like 2,000 times in the few days before they actually got him.
Wow.
You know, again, a terrible scene there. I mean, you
just on that point, Eugene, they removed his security, his bodyguards, and yet Becky Cele has an entourage of security and bodyguards, which is about a mile long. I mean, it must cost the South African taxpayer an absolute fortune.
Yeah, that's the thing. You know, I think when you inflate your own importance to the point where you think you're special versus the people that really need it, you know, you get this kind of circus. I mean, I was just looking again at that. I'm trying to remember the lady's name. Her surname Diakoron, who was also murdered last year. She worked her way up over 50 years in the Department of Health to a senior financial person. And she found the incongruities within the Gauteng Department of Health with all the tender fraud with relation to the PPE for COVID. And she was shot and killed on the way home. She was murdered because she whistle blew. No protection, no nothing. So that's the culture. The minute you scratch within that kind of structure, you're dealing with high local government officials, you're dealing with central government officials, raping the tender system. And I think the one thing that always astounds me, and I get it if a guy puts a little markup on for 10,000 rand. Politics has never been clean. Let's call a spade a spade. Everyone's always taken their cut of something. But when you take something that costs 15,000 rand and you sell it for 150 million rand and you actually get away with it, it's the ludicrousness and the size of the corruption, the lack of value of money, and the volumes that get thrown around. And yet when you see the people, all that's grown is their backsides, possibly a car and the houses. There's nothing to show. They've developed nothing between the ears in terms of capacity. Despite that, you know.
I love the one about the backsides. I mean, some of the biggest backsides I've ever seen in the world are on female members of the South African Police Service. I'm sorry to say it, but that's a fact. Now, just on that particular point, Zweli Mkhize, who used to be the health minister in South Africa, he was basically found guilty of corruption, and yet at Nasrec last year, December, last month, he was putting his name forward as a potential president for South Africa. What does that say to you about the level of integrity amongst the ANC government?
Yeah, sorry, but this reminds me of the old joke. I've forgotten what it is in English, but it's what we call the trokker from vergelijking. You know, when you take, fatter, fattest, and it will always say, the vegan in prison, the president. But Zweli Mkhize was bust. He's got a second thing going against him now, if you have a look. The one that he stepped down for, which was again fraud for PPE in terms of the COVID thing. The fact that people could so openly and blatantly go and make themselves so stinking rich in the middle of what was assumed to have been this worldwide epidemic. I have my own opinions on that, but nevertheless, with no regard to what they were claiming to be doing as health officials, just so there is absolutely no integrity, there's no feeling for anything. They will use their positions at all costs to get as rich as they possibly can. Because of the mentality, it's my turn. Often bandied around within the ANC structures and officials that come into new positions like, it's my turn now. What, your turn for what? Your turn to pillage. That's all it really is. It's just disgusting. There's another thing he's up against for now. Major problem. I mean, Ronald Lamola, the Minister of Justice, is dodging bullets at the moment because of a so-called, shall we call it, at best fake investigation that the company was affiliated to at the time, the legal firm did, as part of this whole scandal to do with the foreign company that came in here with a 600 million rand so-called advisory information for SIA and a couple of and for the railways. It just never stops. There's always some minister involved somewhere. I mean, we go right back to the whole arms thing. There was nothing wrong with the old Daphne class subs. The things hardly worked. We didn't really have a war in the sea. There was nothing wrong with the frigates. There was nothing wrong with the Mirages. There was nothing wrong with the Impalas. As a matter of fact, the Impalas were sold to a South American country, and the Mirages were bought by Central African states. They literally dropped the wheels, fired them up, and flew them out. But we had to go buy Gripens, of which the whole fleet is now grounded because they can't maintain them. One of the top fighters in the world. We can't even start one because it's broken. We had to go and buy all these fancy things, and then the French and German suppliers are like egg on the face. Okay, sorry, we sort of put a brown envelope under the table. Now we know politics is not the straightest profession, but again, coming back to the depth of corruption, and the fact that it seems to be the norm and people are no longer surprised by it is bad, because we're becoming, shall we say, acclimatized to the corruption, which is something we must never do, because the more money that gets stolen, the less money there is to actually do what it was intended for in the first place, and that's good governance.
Yeah, well look, I just on that particular point, Angelo Grisi is a good friend of mine. He's been on a couple of live streams with me. He was a guy with Basasa and went up before the Zondo Commission. He's in a very poor way health-wise. He's can hardly breathe, and because of that he hasn't actually gone to court. And unlike Zuma, who's always sick, but then he goes traveling all over the place, it's crazy out there. But the reason I brought up Angelo Grisi is because he was one of many people that came before the Zondo Commission who was implicated in fraud and implicated in corruption. Now, Angelo Grisi, as far as I understand it, is the only person who is currently facing criminal charges as a result of the Zondo Commission. He's a white guy. He's not part of the ANC. He was actually
the whistleblower. He blew the whistle on a whole lot of the top ANC cadres, and here's a guy who's now before the courts. None of the other guys. What does that say to you, Eugene?
Yeah, I think this is the cancer that's really destroying South Africa at the moment is the current ruling party's philosophy that protect the party at all costs and not the actual voter. They will close ranks, they will protect one another to the point of ludicrousy, come up with the most ridiculous stories that I don't know who believes them, but somehow nobody challenges them, you know. But the fact that, you know, Angelo Grisi came out and basically spilled the beans on what was happening in the Bosasa environment, and the allegations that were made there, as compared to Zuma himself, as compared to Claudi that you mentioned earlier, as compared to so many others that they were not responsible for being the middleman of transferring funds from one person to another as part of business transactions. They pocketed it themselves, which Angela never did, to the best of my knowledge. They were the end of the chain. And there's nothing, not one person that I'm aware of, and I apologize to the listeners if I'm wrong, that I'm aware of that is actually now faces proper prosecution. Let's leave Zuma out of it, because we all know that, you know, somewhere in Parliament there's this shake syndrome that only golf courses can heal. You know, okay, very, very dangerous, lethal disease. But if you get parole and you go and play golf, you'll be fine. You know, so it all depends who you are.
Well, I have to tell you, there's one other guy who's from the ANC who's facing a whole lot of shit, and that is Ace Magashula. But of course, Ace was very much in the Zuma camp, so if you look at the way it's the ANC are fracturing, you can understand what's going on behind the scenes. Now, let's just move on from there. Okay, so we've talked about organized crime, we've talked about armed groups benefiting from the current status in South Africa. What about the man in the street? You know, I've got a lot of friends. The Loving Life community are largely situated in South Africa. They send me emails on a regular basis. They tell me what's going on. I'm sure that most of these people are suffering, sadly, from post-traumatic sickness. You know, they've got PTSD. The actual lives they're having to live because of the growing crime and the fear must be incredibly traumatic on the average South African. And I'm not being racist here, but I'm talking about the minority South African groups. I'm talking about the Indians, the whites, and the colored people. Because, for example, in Cape Town, the gang wars down there with the coloreds is extraordinary. The people who are trying to live a normal life must be living in absolute hell on earth there.
This is very much a reality that you've just mentioned there, Scott, because, you know, we deal with people on a daily basis that have become, so we call it, victims of crime to a larger or lesser degree. And the paranoid fear, if I may use those words, that specifically post what is referred to as the looting or the insurrection of July 2021, you can feel it, a probable thing, you know, on the street. People are scared. People are worried. You can see it in the road rage. You can see it in the increase in contact crimes, where guys will go out to a dinner or to one of the local watering holes and end up having a good old fist fight or a couple of slaps being handed out. You know, that level of aggression and that kind of, I would almost call it aggressive instability in people has escalated. It's I can't quantify it with stats as we speak here. But we pick it up definitely on the kind of calls we're getting: domestic violence, aggressiveness within households, which before never had issues. It comes down to, I would say, really an unidentified and untreated stress that comes from what people saw. I don't think your average Joe that's, you know, is your rate paying, tax paying, sitting duck in South Africa that's being milked by the government because it's one of the few little resources they can still kill, who just wants to be left alone, go to work and come back, was suddenly faced with the horror and the violence that they actually saw, and the gunfire and the people dying, and it was like right on their doorsteps, and it rattled them. You can see we had a joke in the old dispensation where we say, after any kind of bad experience, we all went for counseling with one of the ranking officers, Captain Morgan, And today, if you see how people are focusing on relaxation and the sort of volumes of alcohol being consumed, I would not be surprised if we're not also seeing an increase in that people needing that kind of resource to also just try and calm down, escapism, just get away from it. But definitely there is a heightened fear. We see it in the proliferation of neighborhood watches, street patrollers that have shot up. I mean, post July 2021, in my area we had like 3 hop-along kind of neighborhood watches. We're sitting with 9 fully developed, fully fledged, well-structured, well-organized neighborhood watches, patrollers, round-the-clock patrolling. I mean, it's just a different ballgame.
Yeah.
And it's it comes from that. People feel they need to do something to get back into control, or have some level of feeling we are organized if something like that happens again. They're doing it legally, they're doing it through the structure of community policing, whatever. But definitely a major upsurge in that kind of engagement and involvement by communities that wasn't there before. So I would agree with you very, very much so that there are scars. There are definitely scars on the community. People that, even if you take that level of violence that they saw in those insurrections out of it, people suffering hijackings, home invasions, it's an ongoing thing. They're also basically, victim empowerment. We can help you. Come and chat to our lady at victim empowerment. All respects, you walk in there, there's a half loaf, a ton of Kentucky Fried Chicken, and it's like, talk to me while I eat. They're not skilled. They are not people that have been sent for any kind of training. I have actually to meet one that actually has any kind of formal education in terms of counseling and or psychology or anything like that. So it's placebos. That's the nature of the game in South Africa. Everything is made to dress up like it exists, but it doesn't work.
You know what I find a very disturbing, it's almost like a catalyst for crime in South Africa, is the R word, the racist word. When we talk about July 2021, I think it was in the suburb of Chatsworth, which is an Indian suburb, the Indians stood their ground, and several Africans who were actually invading their ground and obviously weren't there for the right reasons got killed. The Indian community in Durban was labeled by the fake mainstream media as racist. And there was no suggestion that, hey, all they're doing is protecting their family, their lives, their assets. It was this whole totally discredited word, racism. What role do you think that plays in South Africa today to try and justify some of the shit that goes on?
I think the race card is probably the most worn out card that the ANC government and everybody else has right now. When all else fails, pull the race card. If you look at what has been termed the Phoenix Massacre, which I think what you're referring to, that took place up in the Durban North area and so forth. I mean, people that are not in the know, don't know they were literally running battles. There were so many dynamics around what was actually going on during that time. And people talk about the looting. It is a wonderful spin doctor's strategy to take people's mind off the truth. It was not a looting, this was an insurrection. Ramaphosa himself called it an insurrection. The Minister of Defense, when she was instructed by him, as a matter of record, to mobilize the military to stop this nonsense, after 2 days, it was nearly over, responded and said, I don't see an insurrection, I see an uprising. I've never quite worked out the fundamental difference between the two on a political level, but good luck to her. So this whole thing went around, this thing, as we know, was an absolute power struggle. It had nothing to do with hungry people wanting food. It's the biggest load of crap, excuse my French. And this was literally a very well orchestrated. I think this is what people need to be really scared of, and I'm using the word scared for a reason.
Yeah.
The level of efficiency and the success and the objectives that were achieved by the real organizers of that insurrection were brilliant, and nobody had an answer for it. SAPS went to ground. Metro, you must remember, in the greater eThekwini Metro, our mayor, ex-mayor, and also our, what do you call this little guy, the NEC, are all pro-Zuma. Metro
hang on, that ex-mayor of Durban, that female who nearly became the president of the local ANC branch in KwaZulu-Natal, is facing criminal charges for hundreds of millions of rands related to, and this you can't make this shit up, and shit is the operative word, because hundreds of millions of rands related to the disposal of a waste in Durban, and today Durban is a city of shit. You can't even swim in the sea because of all the shit going into the river, and that's coming into the beaches in Durban. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, just a bit of humor here. I see lately they've now changed Durban's name to Dirtban.
That's been too kind.
Yeah, things are not good in Durban, and you're literally going to end up walking and or swimming in the mire, because of a total failure.
I saw an image. You know, you have shark tanks, which are like these little cages you go down, and the sharks sort of swim around you. They've now got what they call shit tanks for Durban. You go down and these things and have a look at the shit.
Get the size of the turds. You know, you think about it being the tourist mecca really of KZN or the East Coast.
It used to be.
It just, they have allowed it to get to this point, and I see, there's a local tradition of people that don't live by the sea. When they come down, they take the 2-liter bottle of seawater back home with a bit of sand in, and apparently it's a traditional cleanser. And just December, yes, watching these poor families taking home this natural cleanser, I thought, Tom, you're going to be cleaner than you ever thought, because you're going to get as sick as hell. But coming back to Gumede and her little entourage of people, and the fact that the ANC stalwarts still seem to want to hang on to them, as if the knowledge that if you hang on to the corrupt, you'll get the crumbs off the table. That's to me is mind-blowing, in that they will keep putting the Steely Boys and Steely Girls back into power, or trying to just recycle the rubbish, just so they can keep the keys to the safe within a certain little cabal.
Musical
that they know
chairs.
that no matter what, they're going to get the crumbs off the table. They're not going to lose total control. And that's all it's about. I probably hope you're not going to put this in the recording, but I would say it's like, just scratching the peanuts around in the shit, because it stays a peanut and it's not going anywhere, but it stays shit too.
You know what I was thinking of there? When I was young, we had a thing called chocolate-coated peanuts, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh.
So you can see it at a political level. We look at, the cabinet reshuffle is no new blood. It's just same shit, different toilet. I mean, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
There is no.
But now the toilet doesn't have a door, and you can't remember how you used to pull the plunger and the thing would flush. Now the flush doesn't work, so the shit just sits there. Yeah. That's where it's got to now. Okay, let's get out of shit and Durban and Gumede and that sort of crap, because I want to move back to the political will in South Africa to contain crime. Clearly, there's no interest in containing crime. The ANC government are party to the crime, and as a supplementary question here is, do you think that the best thing that could happen to South Africa is for the Western Cape to secede and break away from South Africa and set up a completely independent state where they could start rebuilding what South Africa used to represent? Back to you.
Well, I think that's a very interesting, I would almost call it a conundrum in a way, because what's happening in the Western Cape is showing that with a level of focus, with still fighting corruption, with still fighting gang warfare on the flats, good governance can prevail, and people can benefit from a far greater quality of life than anywhere else in the country right now. And that's a given, it's uncontested. So the argument not to see, if I can put it that way, is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. Is it ever going to be allowed? Is it going to be tolerated? Is the ANC ever going to want to lose that part of the breadbasket? I think it'll be a big fight to do it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, why should something that is being a success be pulled down by the rest of the country that has got no will to actually maintain any level of competence?
But Eugene, okay. South Africa today does not have a South African National Defence Force. You raised the issue about they haven't got one plane that flies now with the Defence Force. The South African Police Service is a complete and utter disgrace. They couldn't organise a barbecue in a park. There's absolutely no resistance against a portion of South Africa saying, middle finger to you, ANC, we're going to become our own state. Bring it on! They wouldn't have anything to bring on. They might shuffle around a few of these little vehicles and sort of the show of force, but it would probably be a parade of maybe about the same length as they have when Bekisele has his police detachment around him. That would be about it. And all you need is a couple of buses strategically placed across the road, and you stop them in their tracks. And where do they go from there? I mean, seriously, it would be so easy for a portion of South Africa today to just say, up yours to the ANC, we're going to declare we're a separate state, and we're going to start rebuilding based on meritocracy like Singapore. And I tell you what, in 2 to 3 years' time, you would have half of the expats all over the world coming back to the Western Cape to rebuild that part of South Africa. Because that's why most people left, because they saw the writing on the wall with what's going on with the ANC. So, look, to me, that's the obvious solution.
Yeah. But I think it's probably the only solution to any kind of saving grace for any portion of the South Africa that we see develop right now, from stopping the rot and turning it into something totally tenable and workable. So, on that level, if something like that isn't done, the resistance to the rot can only go so far. Because remember, the political will of the ANC and their tripartite colleagues, if we see what they did and how cleverly they undermined the whole apartheid thing with some level of aggression and some level of fighting, but the majority of it was very clever on the ground stuff, the strikes, the undermining, the insertion of unions into business, and basically crippled us economically from the ground up.
And who was instrumental in that? Who was instrumental in that? Cyril Ramaphosa. Now, look, I left South Africa. I left South Africa in the 1980s to come to Australia. And an event that was a big part of that was what happened in Port Elizabeth at one of the car manufacturing areas. I had this huge protest out there, and a photographer, or a cameraman from the BBC was sent down to cover this protest. And I knew the guy really well. He lived at Auckland Park, or his office was at Auckland Park, where SATV was. And he went down there, and we were in sort of like weekly contact. And when he got back, he said, "Scott, you've got to come and see this," because he knew I was wanting to leave South Africa. And he showed me a video that he was forced to take by people at the protest. He was actually just on the outskirts filming, and a few of these Africans came up and said, "We see you from the BBC, come with us, we want to show you something." And they took him right into the middle of the protest. So he was, hundreds of thousands of people all around him. And they got an African woman totally innocent, out of the crowd, and they started beating her to the ground. And they said to him, "You have to film this." And they were beating her and kicking her and all this sort of shit. And he said at one point, he said, "No, I can't do this anymore, it's too terrible." And they said, "If you don't film this, we're going to do the same to you. We want the world to know what we're going to be doing to the white population in South Africa." Anyway, they beat this woman to where she was basically unconscious. They got a tire, filled it with petrol, set the petrol alight, and he had to film the whole thing. Now, I saw the video, and he said, "Look, I sent that video to the BBC in the United Kingdom, and they said, there's no way in the world we can show this to the world, because it's just too gruesome." That happened, and it happened almost on a daily basis leading up to 1994. And Winnie Mandela, remember that little Stompy, that little guy, that the little 4-year-old or whatever he was, who got necklaced thanks to Winnie Mandela? I mean, this is how brutal these people are.
Yeah, very much so. I think, that's the nature of the beast that a lot of the Western world doesn't actually understand, is that Africa still runs relatively primal structure on many levels. Rural Africa versus urban Africa versus your townships versus your hostels is a different drumbeat, but the primal nature of it remains unchanged.
Look, what you've just said is music to my ears, and I'll tell you why. My mother used to be the personal assistant to the mayor in the little town of Greytown, which is right up in the northern part of KwaZulu-Natal. And over Christmas, when all the mine workers came back to their little villages in KwaZulu-Natal, mainly on the Chigela River, was when they had what they called the attacks. There were these devastating attacks. What would happen was one village would go out and completely destroy another village. And in this one particular attack, and we used to know when the attacks were happening, because you would hear police helicopters flying over Greytown to the Chigela River. But in this one particular attack, one of the guys who was arrested for killing people in the neighboring village was a black professor at one of the universities in Pretoria. Now, this is not some, tribal guy who's sort of got no education. This was a professor who participated in the destruction. They called them faction fights. He actually participated in that faction fight and killed people. A professor at a university in Pretoria. How does that happen?
It just shows that again, when you want to present the perfect constitution to an imperfect country, you have to know the recipe for disaster. Ultimately, at the end of the day, in a country that has thrived on that kind of culture, and it has, and it still continues to this day, be it tribal, be it factions within the same culture, it has never really stopped, because that's the nature of the beast. How can you bring in something that is so soft that you basically give all the rights to the people that are committing the crimes, and you take away the power?
Yeah.
It's because you as the government wanted to be like that. You must remember, coming back to the point on that the political will to contain crime as well, corruption is a crime, okay? But in politics, corruption is not a crime, because they know that if they are allegedly caught and investigated, nothing will happen.
Yeah.
It never has happened. Zombie Commission, whatever, they're picking on the Greases and that of the world, but nothing's happening. So the lack of will of these people at the highest level to take proper action against lawlessness has filtered down all through South Africa. It's gone down to grassroots now. People have learned to just deny, throw enough smoke, and they're going to get away with it.
Yeah.
But where they've made a mistake, because there's no economic growth out of it right now, The generations coming out of school, the youth that want to do something are walking into a wall, and they're becoming unruly and angry right now. So it's government leadership that has created this problem, and they're doing nothing about it, no matter which way they want to talk about it. And they can't deal with it because it goes against their ideology.
Yeah.
So you're coming back to, even the party, the ruling party has this ideology of protecting the party at all costs at the expense of the people. There is no way that that should be allowed, because the people never voted the party, they voted the leadership to come in and take them where they promised they were going to take them. There's no capacity or ability to take them there, and they don't have the competence to deal with it. So, ultimately at the end of the day, this is that whole mire that's being mixed up all the time about the chicken or the egg. Well, right now we've got scrambled eggs and no chicken, because ultimately it's an orchestrated environment.
Now,
that's what we say.
I don't know how much time you got left, but there are a couple of little questions I'd still like to ask you before we wrap this up, because this has been a fascinating discussion. And just before we wrap up, would you like to explain your role in criminology and your experience in this whole area of crime? Because I think that needs to be raised.
Okay. It goes back quite a way, obviously. I have a passion for justice and for community specifically, because when the system crumbles, the power lies with the people. And to create that knowledge that the power lies with you is to engage communities, work them through. We have many, despite the failings, we have many, we call them legal structures for people to still organize and train and develop within community policing forums. The so-called white paper on community policing is the way to go. We know why it's failing. We know it's never going to work because there's no buy-in from the police on it. But for us as community, it's essential, and to understand the levels of crime, the nature of crime, and the functions of crime, that you can actually assess what you're up against. The old adage, as per The Art of War, written by Sun Tzu, and my copy already looks like it's been in the watch machine 6 times, but not a good advice there. If you know your enemy, but you don't know yourself, you will lose. If you know yourself, but you don't know your enemy, you've got a 50% chance of winning. But if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you've got a real good chance of success. And this is really where we're trying to get communities to build up to. So, I was involved with the South African Police Services for a couple of years, or many years, 17 years, and I worked specifically on projects of empowering and training communities. We worked on communication strategies with communities to forewarn and forearm. Some of these projects, one of them specifically made it to India, going back now in 29, somewhere there. CAPAM, the Commonwealth Association of Public Administration, adopted it as a finalist in the category of community dialogue, believe it or not. And we never got there because Lindiwe Sisulu refused to buy a ticket when she realized it was a low-grade police person that had set up the project, and the generals wanted to go. And when we spoke to them about the project, they realized it's a bit more involved than they thought, so nobody went.
Now, hang on. Before we move on, I need to address this piece of shit called Lindiwe Sisulu. She used to, she is. She used to be involved in, talk about a revolving chair. She is absolutely useless. She's screwed up every department she's been minister of. She used to be involved in Department of Social Security, or in other words, the poor people in South Africa. I've spoken to so many people from so many different organizations who say that she was worse than useless. She never did anything for the poor people in South Africa when she was a minister there. And they had these phone numbers. You were supposed to be able to phone if you needed assistance on this or on that, and they would ring out 24/7. No one ever answered them. It was all bullshit. That happened under her watch. And now she's apparently the Minister of Tourism. Well, we know how that's working out in Durban with the what do you call it, the dirt bin? Dirt bin. But during COVID, as the Minister of Tourism, she blew 200 million rand on travel, accommodation, liquor, and parties during COVID-19. This is Lindiwe Sisulu, the woman you took. And this is typical for the ministry under Cyril Ramaphosa. It just shows you how corrupt they are. It's like Marie Antoinette saying, "Oh well, if they can't get bread, let them eat cake." You know, they're just absolute BS. Sorry, back to you.
Yeah. No, 100%, you know, and so just a little adage there. I don't remember during the lockdown as well, when you're not allowed to transport alcohol in your vehicle either.
Yeah.
The man in the hat was found with 2 bottles of whiskey on the back seat of his car. That was just when they So,
we're talking the Schladi Mutzening's twin brother, Bekesele.
I've dedicated my life to understanding crime, tracking crime, researching crime, the reasons for crime, the South African model. You know, we get fed so much cliches and BS about, you know, the whole sort of, the role of apartheid in crime, and we've still got the legacy of apartheid. Now, I'm not going to try and put away or undermine it. But, you know, the problem is, there's nothing wrong with being poor. It's not illegal. There's nothing wrong with being rich unless you make money illegally. But basic values have got nothing to do with money. Basic values and appreciation of the state and getting your services from the state in 30 years could have been perfected. I'm so sick and tired of hearing apartheid. I wish it was apartheid 9 already, because really at some point, life is an evolution.
Mate, I've got to say, Eugene, that every time bloody, I call him Hippo Eyes, okay? You know, Cyril Ramaphosa. Every time Cyril Ramaphosa has a family discussion, Hippo Eyes, as I call him, says, "Oh, we got a problem in this area, and it's because of apartheid." And apartheid gets blamed for everything. It's even funnier when he blames Jan van Riebeck. I mean, that's a little bit too far. But it's happened.
That's happened. You know, I must be honest, even on Zoom, I climbed into Jan van Riebeck, and then the other day we saw these guys getting off the African continent to try and sneak into Europe. And there was the 2 photos, you know, of the ship when Riebeck came in, and the little dinghy that overcrowded on the way. It's like, these guys, even then our technology was better. But anyway.
Anyway, let's get back to wrapping up this live stream. Now, a big part of your job is statistics. Tell us about the paralysis when it comes to misleading the population.
You know, statistics, like anything, can be tweaked. And because people say the statistics are, you know, statistics has this aura of science around it that stats can't lie. But unfortunately, stats can be tweaked like anything, and it's how, what are you actually measuring?
Science lies, we know that too. Yeah, back to you.
Yeah, big time. So, you know, if you follow the history of SAPS and where the stats really started coming in, it was, you know, post the change in 1994 and the development and the crime surge then, which was really petty crime and silly stuff that was going on. People were saying the crime's going through the roof, there's a problem here, you know, things are getting worse and so forth. And it was like, come on, it's not really, you know, it's part of the change kind of stuff. To the point where specifically your upper class, those years, minorities were saying, but hang on, we're being hammered here, you know, there's something wrong. And then SAP suddenly had to come up with something to say, well, okay, we can't like have this perception out there, we've got to fix this. And then some bright spot came up with, let's throw some stats out there. So they'll say, you know, South Africa has roughly 50 murders a month, or we've had, you know, 600 murders for the year.
Hang on, isn't it 70 a day?
Yeah, I'm using it, you know, as a hypothetical thing.
I thought that was a bit way off. Anyway, yeah, carry on.
Yeah, I'm playing nice. But don't worry, New York is having 80 a day. But they won't say, listen, murders per 1,000 people or per 100,000 people, you know, cap it too, because the population there is 10 times our population. You know, things like that were used to create a perception that we're not as bad as anybody else.
Yeah.
When you start breaking stats down, I mean, is an Islamic woman in Arabia going to report her uncle raping her? No.
Yeah.
It's a cultural thing, it's a patriarchal society.
Yeah.
So the rate there is going to be a hell of a lot lower than ours. You know what I'm saying? And vice versa. In gangland Mexico, is everybody going to report every crime because they really want the police coming into their narco-controlled areas? No. So the stats are not correct. And in South Africa, that's becoming a bigger and a bigger problem. On a day-to-day basis, I deal with everything from car theft to hijacking to so forth. And you would be surprised at how many people say, look, I don't even want a case, just get me my property back. I'm not interested.
Wow.
We've got probably 30 to 35% off the cuff doing that.
Wow.
So when we look at our stats, they are really skewed because of the lack of faith in the police. They're really skewed in the lack of faith in the detective agencies to actually get to some solution. So there's just a bit of lost property, a bit of inconvenience. They look, I don't even call SAPs, I don't want that inconvenience around me. And they just take their stuff back in whatever state. So the stats is really, we've been given these things, and then every year, our all-time crime is down, but we are seeing a peak with a couple of murders and a few violent crimes. Really? What's down? Is that your petty stuff that's no longer being reported is now offsetting the rise in the violent crime, because that is being reported. Because people have to go to hospital, people are dead, they end up in the morgue, whatever,
Yeah.
so it gets reported. Versus less petty stuff, so the overall crime is down, but the violent and contact crimes is up. It's not up, it's probably just stable or getting worse, but the general crime isn't down. People are just not reporting anymore because they're sick and tired of it. They don't trust the justice system, they know it's compromised, they don't want to be messed around by some little constable at the police station telling him, you don't have a case because you don't have an eyeball hanging on your cheek or whatever, and they're walking away. We see it on a day-to-day basis. I can't quantify what that percentage is, but I can tell you it's a daily occurrence, at least 2 to 3 out of 10 crimes. People don't want SAPs.
Wow.
So what are those stats worth?
Yeah, it's all bullshit, isn't it?
Yeah, smoke and mirrors.
Well, my understanding is that 4 of the major cities in South Africa are in the top 10 most dangerous cities in the world today. And my understanding is that one is Cape Town, one is Pretoria, another is Pietermaritzburg, and I think the 4th is not Durban, but I think it's Johannesburg. I think those are the 4 most dangerous cities in South Africa, and they're in the top 10 most dangerous cities in the world today. Do you have any comment to make on that?
Dealing with what we do on a day-to-day basis, for interest, I was in West Africa twice, 2013, 2019, I think it was. And I was in Afghanistan until the 14th of August, the day Kabul fell. I managed to get out on a commercial flight. So, seen a bit of conflict areas, seen a bit of this, seen a bit of that. But if I look at the South African model, definitely, the state we're in now and where we are is comparative to, I would say, a conflict zone plus. We often joke amongst ourselves in the industry where we say, Bear Grylls wants these like top survival things where he crawls out the top of the mountain using a toothpick and a matchstick. I'd rather just tell him, if you can run down Point Road to the end and shout, "I hate Congolese," and make it back, that would be a really stupid.
That would be a really stupid thing to do. It's absolutely terrible, because when you think of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine right now, there have probably been more murders in South Africa since February, when Russia went into Ukraine and invaded. There have probably been more murders of people or civilians against civilians in South Africa than there have been civilians killed during the war in Ukraine. This is how it's like a war zone, isn't it?
It is. I think this is where people get what's the word I'm actually looking for? Become complacent in a way, probably not the right word, to what's going on around them, because it's happening all the time. The old Cyril analogy of the frog in the hot water. But if you really look at the actual contact crimes, the violence, the shootings, the murders on the streets, the organized crime, gangland shootings, this would be proper hits on taxi owners, on tow truck driver owners, on whistleblowers, where a vehicle just drives up and they just empty 20, 30 rounds into the person and drive off. And it's done with such impunity. There's no masks, there's no covering of the face, they don't care about cameras. They are that sure that they are untouchable. And the amount of deaths due to that type of killings exceeds your average war zone. It does exceed your average war zone. Wow. You know, if you take who was died in South Africa post 94 versus everyone that died in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, we've surpassed Vietnam.
Yeah, and I would also just add that the ANC are basically paying hit squads to take out political opponents. This is actually something that's been suppressed by the fake mainstream media in South Africa, but that's actually going on. Now, I'm going to wrap up this live stream because there's so much. Look, we'll have to have another live stream because this is a huge topic. But tell me about the role of private security companies in South Africa. And what would happen if they were not those private security companies? What would South Africa look like today?
That's interesting. The proliferation of private security in South Africa it's a matter of record. I mean, there's over 1.5 million registered private security members with the industry regulator. A large number of those companies hold legal firearms and so forth. So what we actually see happening, because of the lack of resources and numbers that SAPs have generally within their sectors and their communities, and because of the lack of trust that is growing in the law enforcement agencies, your civilians are turning more and more to the private security model because they'd rather phone a control center and report and get a quick response to just secure the scene and keep them safe. And the control center or whoever then takes it up with the police and will deal with it, that it saves them the frustration of doing so. So it's becoming sort of a law enforcement agency by proxy in a way. The interesting development on this is that, the relationship between the South African Police Services and the private security has actually grown into a formalized, although not on paper, type of structure where we are actually seen as a force multiplier in terms of manpower and ability to deal with high spikes of crime, to actually put manpower into operational tasks that they go out on where they're short of manpower. So the merging of the two is actually on the cards. There's been some mumbles of creating a more formalized relationship even between the private security industry and SAP. So the private security industry it's really growing in South Africa, but it's also become another vehicle for organized crime. And what we've picked up is that there are companies that are opening up now that is clearly money laundering, companies that are opening up purely to create firepower to protect certain people. You've got a guy with 5 clients that's driving around in Mercedes double cabs, he's running around in a Lamborghini, this type of thing. And us in the industry know that your client to vehicle ratio to afford those kind of toys is, I don't know how you're doing it, to be quite honest. It's not out of security you're making that money, I'm not pointing fingers at any one entity, but there are questions being asked about a few, and I know there are investigations into a few. But again, those guys with that kind of money, the chances of those investigations actually getting away are very small because of the size of the brown envelope, so we don't hold our breath,
Yeah.
That's the reality of South Africa. Justice is defined by the fattest envelope.
Wow. Now, I'm going to wrap this live stream up, but I just have one final question for you. What are your future predictions for South Africa?
The only solution to this kind of insurgency is counterinsurgency, which takes the political will and the will of the people. I don't see that ever evolving in South Africa because I think this environment has been nurtured to the benefit of the political elite. So personally, I actually see South Africa sliding further down the scale. But I also predict that the one mistake that the politicians have made is that they've misread the populace. if you see how the people came together during the so-called uprising of 2021, and it was actually quite amazing because there were no barriers, no racial barriers, no cultural barriers. The people stood up and said, enough is enough. If you come in here, you're going to get your comeuppance. And I think that's actually what stopped it dead in its tracks, because it's the one thing the organizers never foresaw. I think they were still riding on the back. It's my theory of the Mao little red book thing of kill one and frighten 1,000. And it backfired, and the guys said, put your foot in your chap, it's not going to happen, we've had enough. And I'm not sure they know what to do with that just now. But it doesn't mean there won't be some strategy to try and disarm or some sort of counter action to make community less effective going forward, because they'll have to do that to continue the slide. If I look at the different organizations, activists that are coming out now, people that are speaking out, that are tackling the structure, that are prepared to put their necks out there, it's more than ever before. So the only twinkling of hope that I foresee is that they mustn't misread the general resistance and the endurance of the South African populace. They will take so far, and then it's going to burn. It's not going to be a good thing, and we won't win anything out of it, but I think it'll be a wake-up call. But I don't see anything positive in the near future. I see a continued slip and slide. I think the elections next year are going to be messy. But I don't think they will have sorted out all the infighting. And there's radical economic transformation faction that's going on there that has been the birth parents of the construction mafia and that kind of totally legal structure. It's not gone. So for the next few years, I don't see it working well. But if somebody with half a brain and with a bit of an intention to actually be a leader comes into power, there are so many models of counterinsurgency operational tactics to undo what's going on in this country on a policing level. We're not talking war, we're not talking civil war, but it's the same principles that have been tried and tested in various parts of the world now by people returning from conflict areas where they've got serious gang issues and so forth, and they are unraveling those structures day by day, and it's quite a successful model. But it takes a whole new mindset. It takes a political will, it takes a policing will, it takes the backing of the people. The problem is when you've got large communities that receive protection, funding, and or benefits from Crown, it's very difficult for them to give that up because they're cutting off their nose to spite their face. So the longer that takes, the deeper those criminal entities get entrenched in the communities, the harder it's going to be to effect any kind of change going forward. So is there a solution? There is a plan of action that could work. Is it actually going to happen? No, I don't believe it will. And the long-term thing is it's going to take the will of the people and the fighters on the ground to keep this government focused that it's not going to be a pushover. And that's going to just be legal resistance until such point as anything else is necessary. But that's, to me, the outcome. I don't foresee any miracle.
Now, obviously the best outcome is to secede. In other words, places like the parts of the Free State and the Northern Cape and the Western Cape to secede from this tyranny that's taking place in the rest of South Africa. One final question for you, Eugene.
Yeah.
Okay, one final question. What would happen if, and this is a highly potential situation I'm talking about, what would happen if Eskom collapsed? What would happen to the crime rate in South Africa?
Talking from the experiences of the past and where we've seen grid failure either on a regional, or a bigger area, and going back to, remember, you probably recall many years back, there was that total grid failure in Los Angeles, and the one thing about human nature that came through in all the cases, the minute people think you can't see them, the most law-abiding guy becomes the biggest rogue you've ever met. That's a fact. There is something about the human race that needs to be controlled, and they need to know there's a consequence or they become unchecked. If this country's grid collapses, then the last guy out must switch the lights off if there's any lights to go, because there will be nothing left. Our mining is down the chutes. Our farming is down the chutes. Our production, in terms of industrial production, is down the chute. There is nothing left without lights. We become, the typical model in Africa. There's an interesting book called The State of Africa. I forget the author. It's written a few years back. And if you look at the model, South Africa has followed that recipe to the T. Take it over, sacrifice the farmland, put your money into industrialization, empty the state coffers, try and get back your forex through your industrialization. Excuse me, industrialization fails, currency goes for a ball of chalk, your country becomes a third world dust bowl. And as much as people think, as we have the third biggest economy in Africa right now, I don't know how we got to third, I do know, but I'd rather just avoid that topic. The ultimate is become a dust bowl. And I think it's real, and I think it's quite scary. You can only do so much on generators, and you can only do so much on solar and so forth, because the country's made no real contingencies for this kind of thing. So you're going to go from 0 to 0 with a flick of a switch.
Yeah.
The American and the French parties that are talking about they've teamed up with South Africa for this new sustainable energy thing. I haven't seen anything yet. I have no idea what they're talking about. I smell a bit of Patrice Motsepe in there. A lot of fingers pointing towards a huge capitalization of the collapse of Eskom in a privatized role. His name seems to pop up quite a bit. The fact that he's the brother-in-law of the paramount chief is of interest.
Paramount chief.
But, it's not going to be good for us. I think it'll be the end of South Africa. Any country that has developed any level of industrialization as its hub, as we have. I mean, South Africa, for better or worse, we've got production facilities, Mercedes, Volkswagen, Nissan, BMW, Ford, are all being assembled and or built in this country. That'll all be gone. Toyota have said already, any glitches, they're off to Nigeria. That's the South Coast over with, So, yeah, there's a lot of ifs hanging there, and none of it looking good.
Well, all I can say in conclusion is that Dr. David Livingstone, who roamed around Africa in the 1840s, 1850s, and he called Africa the Dark Continent. And I think that's where it might well be going back to. In other words, a place where there is no power. And in some ways it's going to be quite interesting, because I don't know if you're following what the World Economic Forum are up to, but they're pushing a centralized bank or central bank digital currency, which requires electricity. So if Africa goes back to being the dark continent with no electricity, it could actually sabotage the whole one world order's plan. So it's a really interesting twist in the tail.
Yeah, it might be a good thing.
All I can say to you, Eugene, is that if the Western Cape do succeed in seceding from the rest of South Africa and setting up a separate state, there's going to be a huge repatriation of expats into the Western Cape. And that place is going to explode. It's going to be the most dynamic state in the world. And guess what? I'll be coming in on the back of them. I'll be coming back too, because we can all see through the shit that the ANC government are. Mate, look, I just want to say thank you so much for our discussion, and I apologise for the earlier glitch that we had, but that does happen. But look, I look forward to chatting to you again, perhaps later in 2023, and if something happens. Yeah, if something happens that you'd like to discuss or put out there, just contact Marlena and we'll get you back on again. And
that would be awesome.
Do you have a web page or a Facebook page or something like that?
Yeah, I have a Facebook page. I can forward the link to you just now. I'll send it to you via this.
Yeah, please do. I'll put that link down below this video when I actually put it up.
All right, fantastic.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for chatting. Cheers, mate. Bye for now.
Have a good day further.
Bye.
All right, guys. That was my discussion with Eugene, and Yeah, we had a few last questions there, but things kept on coming into my head, and I thought, I've got to ask him about this or ask him about that. You know what it's like. But anyway, the final thing we talked about with ESCOM, when I have my pre-recorded live stream with Wynand du Toit, we're going to be talking about what happens if ESCOM goes down. And I think you'll find that very, very interesting, because it really puts things in a different light for South Africa. I'm going to go out now with Hier Bly Ek Boer, and see you tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Johannesburg time. Here we go.
Meer as 61,000 van ons voorvaders het op die grens vir ons gesterwe, sodat ons vry kan wees. Die is my land, die is my reg, hier is ek boer. Stof is ek gemaak en sal ek terugkeer. Die Bybel is die woord waaruit ek leer, soos die grond op die aarde. Hier bly ek boer. Soos diep in die nacht sal die vyand kom, maar hier bly ek staan en ek draai nie om, want jy maak my nie bang nie. Hier bly ek boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my zweet, my rug. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voor. Hier bly ek boer. Soos blaatsam in die somer wat vreugde bring, my oupa wat maniekiero kon sing, soos hy stap deur die lande. Hier was hy boer. My wortels lê diep in die grond geplant. Hy sien soos my pa, los ek vir jou die land, en jy hoef nie te vrees nie. Hier sal jy boer. Die is my land waarvoor ek sal veg. Die is my bloed, my zweet, my rug. Die is die plek waar my voorvaders leef. Die is my land, hoor wat ek jou sê. Die is my land, wat my mense voor. Hier bly ek boer. Die leeuw sal kom, 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 die leeuw sal kom.